What's up guys, and welcome back. Obviously I'm back at Volley Motorsports surrounded by all of these amazing Porsches, but I'm not here today to work on any Porsches. I'm here today to work on my 521 project. I have subframes and I have a lot of parts now. So I'm gonna start with chassis design, and hopefully I can get the design done quickly and get into the fabrication process ASAP, because time is running out. We've got 2 months left to get this thing completely done, road tested, and head to Laguna Seca for grid life. That's not a lot of time, and I have a ton of work to do. So let's head back to the fab shop and let's get started right away. So over the last few days, I've been able to make some pretty good progress, but it's not really been on the truck itself. It's been sourcing a lot of parts. I've decided what subframes I'm gonna run, and it is the Miata front subframe. And I was also able to make some progress on the truck itself. I got the engine compartment all stripped out, so just removed all the wiring and the brakes, everything. Also from the interior. So the interior is completely gutted now, and all that stuff that was in here has been removed. Got basically a clean slate to start working. So a K-Series engine in a Miata is nothing new. There are a few companies that actually make kits for it. I reached out to the guys at K-Power because they actually race K-swapped Miatas in grid life. I ordered a bunch of parts from them, but one thing that I did not get from them is their mount and oil pan, because I wasn't sure where the engine was gonna fit in this chassis with this subframe. So I didn't want to be stuck with the engine being in one spot, because I might have to move it around. I'm gonna head back to my old shop. There's actually a Miata over there. I'm gonna go measure up the Miata before I go any further on this, because I need some real numbers here to figure out if this is even going to work, if it's even feasible. All right, well, I made it back to my old shop in Anaheim after a 45-minute drive, and it's lunchtime. I'm hungry, but luckily today's video is sponsored by Huel. Huel Black Edition is not a protein shake. It is a complete meal with all the essentials that your body needs, and it's ready to go in less than 60 seconds. So my issue is when I get too busy, I just forget to eat. And then in the late afternoon, I have zero energy and I completely crash. So Huel has solved that problem for me. It's super easy to use no matter where I am. I just need to add 17 ounces of water, some scoops of powder, and I have a meal. Huel Black Edition contains all the nutrients you need, including the right amount of protein, essential fats, carbohydrates, fiber, vitamins, and minerals as part of a balanced diet. The Huel Black Edition powder is super easy to use. Just add water, powder, shake, and enjoy. Huel Black Edition powder starts at $2.65 a meal and only takes 60 seconds to prepare. Huel Black Edition powder is an extremely inexpensive, easy way to have a complete meal, and you guys should try it for yourselves. You can do that by going to huel.com/SF15 or clicking the link in the description, and that's gonna save you 15% off your order from Huel. All right, now let's go measure up this Miata. My dad's old Miata is here, so this is the perfect way for me to get the measurements I need off of the chassis and off of the subframes, so that when I'm grafting those subframes or suspension components into the new truck chassis, I know exactly how they're supposed to be, the angles, the rake that they sit in, and distances and heights off the ground and all that kind of stuff. So this is obviously on coilovers, it's lowered, and I want to get all of these dimensions, and then I know where the chassis is compared to the subframes. But I'm gonna get this thing up in the air and start getting all those measurements, because this info is priceless when you're putting all of these components from a car into something completely different. Knowing how high the subframes need to be, the front and rear, because they're not always the same. It's not like it's one flat plane and the front and rear subframes are just bolted right on. They're on different planes, they might be at different angles, so getting that information is gonna be critical. Get this up in the air and start taking measurements.
Ready?
Yep. Are you gonna get down?
Maybe.
Or are you just gonna stay up there the whole time?
I'll stay up here.
For like an hour? For an hour?
Yeah.
No, you're not gonna stay up there for an hour. So I'm gonna start with the front subframe here, and looking at how it mounts into the chassis. I'm gonna take some pictures of all that stuff, but I'm also gonna get measurements from the center line of the lower control arm bolts. So I know where that control arm is sitting, if it has any angle or rake to it. I can get all that. And I'm also gonna get a dimension from where the chassis is to where those are. That way I can measure off of the chassis to the height of those pickup points, and then the same thing in the rear, and that'll give me the heights of the subframes. And I'll do the same in the rear, getting those measurements from the lower control arms, just to make sure there's no twist in the subframe. Sometimes there's different heights mounting the lower control arms or upper control arms, and those are gonna affect how the car drives, the dive, anti-squat. There's a lot of stuff that all of that suspension geometry does in a car. But right now, all I really need to figure out is the heights of those bolts so that I know where to put the subframes. And then if I want to change anything, if I want to change the angles of the arms or anything like that, I can figure all of that out later. But right now, just get the baseline of what this car, how the subframes are mounted in this car. So this is the basic idea to measure, is off the ground to those pickup points. But being that it's so high up in the air, it's going to be really hard to get an accurate measurement, because obviously if the tape measure is off by a couple degrees on the floor, then it's going to get longer. So I could sit here and measure that over and over again and keep moving the tape measure until I get the smallest number, which is when the tape measure would be perfectly straight up and down in all directions. But that's going to take a while. So I'm just going to lower the car down so it's just a couple feet off the ground, where I can crawl on the ground and get those measurements, because they're going to be a lot more accurate easily. But I just want to show you guys how to do it to get those pickup points. I'm also going to take some pictures right now before I put it down, so that I have those just in case I need to go back and look at how this was mounted in the car and what the chassis looked like. So the measurement that I'm getting right now is, well, it's right at 390 millimeters. And obviously the tires are off the ground. All that is kind of irrelevant. It's the distance from the ground to the lower control arm pickup points, which are the pivot points where the lower control arms bolt on the front and the rear. So I got 390 millimeters to this point. I also got 390 millimeters to the front bolt. So there's no angle in that lower control arm. And now I know that these are slightly higher, 10 millimeters higher than the ones in the front. The front I was getting 380 millimeters. So the pickup points in the rear are a little bit higher up, 10 millimeters, and that's what I really need to know. So the distance from the ground here, that doesn't really matter, but I'm also getting distances from the chassis to the ground, so I can see if there's rake in the chassis, and there's about 5 millimeters of difference between the front of the chassis and the rear of the chassis as far as in between the wheelbase. So I got that, and then I can figure out what the angle is, the rake of the chassis, but I'll have to do all that with some math and figure all that out. But now I have these dimensions. I'm gonna get a few other dimensions that I might not need, but just to get them while I'm here. The height off the ground to here is irrelevant because that's the height of the subframe. So yeah, most of that is just these pickup points that I needed to get. So I'm gonna pull a wheel off and get the offset and the width of the wheel, and then I'm gonna measure with toe plates the total width. So I know that if these are 8-inch wheels with a 0 offset, that if I put those onto the truck, I'll know how wide it's going to be. And that'll give me some information that I can use later when I'm trying to decide how much offset of a wheel to get, or if in fact I need to narrow the track width and not even use these subframes, but actually weld the control arms onto the new chassis at a narrower position so that the track width isn't too wide and the wheels don't stick out really far from the bodywork. That's kind of tricky right now because I don't have the bodywork. I don't know how wide the truck is going to be. I don't have the flares yet. This is all information that I'm going to need later on, but well, I still have to figure out how wide the body kit is before I get it, which I might not get it for another month. So I need to have all that fabrication done really quickly to get this project done in time. Anyway, I'm just gonna get this measurement and hope that I figure everything out. So we should have, it's 15 by 8 1/4. I don't know if I've ever seen an 8 1/4 inch wheel before. I'm gonna try to find the offset that should be stamped here as well. That doesn't mean anything. That's a 15 by 8.25 width. Might pull another wheel off to see if I can see it any better. So I can't get a good offset that's marked, so I'm just gonna measure the back spacing and figure out what the offset is. So I got toe plates on here. These tires are stretched, so the toe plate's actually sitting on the wheel, and then I'm gonna measure to the face where it bolts onto the hub, the machine surface, and we are right around 144 millimeters. All right, so the wheel is sitting on the face, same thing because of the stretch. So now I'm just gonna measure off of this point down to the ground to get that the opposite side measured. It is right around 94. Okay, so the difference between the height to the face here and the back, well, that's 144 millimeters, and then the front to the face, or the front to the mounting face, was 94. So we have 50 millimeters of difference. So 50 millimeters of difference between the front and the rear. So we're gonna basically say that the center line of the wheel is the number of those two added up, right? But 50 millimeters of difference, cut that in half, it's 25. So it's 25 millimeters offset towards the inside. So that's a positive 25 millimeter inset. So now that I know that number, when I have other wheels, or if I'm measuring it out for a different wheel, or trying to figure out which wheels to run and to fit the bodywork and all that, I'll know that this is how wide it is if I ran 8.25 inch wheels with a 25 millimeter offset. If I went to 0 offset, then I would gain 25 millimeters of track width on each side. So 50 millimeters total width increase. So now I've got both the toe plates on the wheels like this, and I'm not measuring toe, so I don't need 2 tape measures front and back. I know that the alignment on this car is not going to be off by more than maybe 3/16 or a couple millimeters of toe difference, which doesn't matter in this measurement. So measurement here is right under 67 inches is the outside of the wheel to the outside of the wheel. Now that I have that, I can go and measure the truck and say, okay, well, the truck is 57 inches and this is 67 inches. So it's 10 inches wider. So it's 5 inches wider on each side than the truck. I don't think it's gonna be that much, but we'll find out when we get back to the other shop. All right, so we're back at Volley Shop, and I've got some numbers now. So first thing I'm gonna do is measure the width of the truck and just see, obviously when we measured the Miata, we were at about 67 inches from the outside of the wheels, and those are only 8.25 inch wide wheels with a 25 offset. So nothing crazy. This is gonna have an angle kit on it. That's gonna push the suspension out even farther. I think it's about 50 millimeters, about 2 inches per side wider with the angle kit. So that's already over 70 inches wide just with the angle kit and some 0 offset wheels, which is what the angle kit wants. Let me get some measurements here. Even though I don't have the measurements for the body kit, that's just a guess, but kind of a ballpark of where we're at. All right, so since the truck's not on the ground, it doesn't have any wheels on it or anything, I'm just gonna get a kind of a rough idea from this point to how wide it is here. It's right around 4 inches. So I'll measure across, I'll add 8 inches to that, and then that'll give me about where we're at right now with a factory body. All right, so right now it looks like the truck edge of the fender to edge of the fender is about 63 inches, and the Miata was 67 inches on the tire width. So maybe it could fit at 66 inches on the fenders. I didn't measure the Miata fenders, but obviously it's got some camber, which means the bottom's gonna stick out a bit more. But that looks like we only have about 4 inches to 3 inches of difference right now, and this is gonna be narrower. So the body kit, I'm guessing, is about 3 inches wider. Maybe it's 4 inches wider. So if we had the factory suspension, this exactly the way it is in this subframe, then with the width of the flares and an 8-inch wheel with a 205 tire, we would be sticking out a little bit. But now we're gonna add the angle kit, and the angle kit is 2 inches wider on each side. So now we're gonna be sticking out 2 inches outside of the flares on each side. And that's too much. I don't want it to look like that. That I think is gonna look terrible. So now I have to figure out, can I make it narrower? Can I package everything properly? This is getting a lot more complicated. I thought that this was gonna bolt in, and I thought that it was gonna be really close, but it looks like it's quite a bit farther off than I was anticipating. All right, so I think I have an idea of how to do this, and it's gonna require me making basically the subframe mounting points a lot narrower, 100 millimeters narrower. So that's about 4 inches, 2 inches on each side, to make up for the 50 millimeters wider that the angle kit is. So the only way to really do that is to cut the center of the subframe and take out that 100 millimeters, put it back together, weld it, possibly move the steering rack mounts to get those back in the right spots. But now I'm modifying the subframe, and that's still going to be difficult to fit into the chassis. So I think the easier way is to just build tabs onto the new chassis. So square tubes that run forward, tabs that are coming off of it, just like the subframe, and the control arms can mount directly to that. So basically, I eliminate the subframe completely, and any issues that I might have with oil pan clearance, I still have to worry about the steering rack and have to figure out how I'm gonna get past that. But for now, I think what I'm gonna do is just build a space frame, really, not use the subframes at all, just use the control arms and make the mounting points onto my new square tube chassis.
Carlos.
Hey, Carlos, that's my subframe. He doesn't care. Everything in the shop is his. So this is just a really rough draft sketch of what I'm thinking. So basically, this is from the side, obviously, which just kind of shows the angles of the square tube chassis, and then this is all roll cage tubing. Really basic. Nothing is really dimensioned or anything like that. It's just a sketch to kind of get an idea of how it would all work. And then this is from the top. So these are the frame rails, and I just do straight lines, but these are probably going to have to be different widths in the rear and then taper in to the front and get narrower, because we're going to have to narrow up that front track width. This might be quite a bit narrower and then kind of stretch out. And these over here are where the main hoop and forward hoop are going to mount to. So that's the edge of the body of the truck. Frame rails are going to be a bit narrower than that, so they can't mount, the roll bars can't mount to that part of the chassis. So that's just a really general sketch. I'll put it all into Fusion 360 later and get all the dimensions set when I actually start cutting tubes. But I just wanted to put pen to paper and get an idea of what everything might look like. It's a lot easier to just sketch it out, throw away drawings that don't work, rather than sitting there on AutoCAD and trying to put dimensions on everything to get an idea. So that's what I got so far. Still really rough. It might change. So this is an angle kit for the Miata. That's one of the main reasons that I went with a Miata suspension, was because a lot of these parts are available and they're inexpensive. I didn't want to have to build my own suspension arms and completely redesign something. So this was the easiest way and least expensive way to get it done. This is a pretty good kit. I've never used them before, but it looks pretty decent. They basically take in all of the caster out of the knuckle, it looks like. So it's like a zero trail. That's just from glancing at it. It should work all right. I can move stuff around to get it to work perfectly, but this is what we're working with. But the idea is that this is 50 millimeters longer than the factory arms on each side. So if we put this up next to the original stuff, yeah, it might be hard to see on video, but that's quite a bit wider. So if we just bolt this up onto the subframe and remeasure it, basically gain 100 millimeters, 4 inches. So we're gonna have to take that out of the subframe or out of the chassis. So if I do new square tubes, I can eliminate this subframe completely. Square tubes that would run forward and tabs that come off of that square tube with holes in them where I can bolt the control arms directly to them. I'll have to make something that comes up for the upper control arm, but for the lower control arm, it's basically the square tubes that run forward, tabs, and then I can put them in any width. The next issue that we need to overcome is the oil pan and the steering rack. Right now, if we were to put the engine in and not cut the firewall and not push the engine back, then the steering rack is gonna sit right here in the middle of the oil pan. And obviously that's not gonna work. Here is the aftermarket pan that I picked up for this thing that has some trap doors in it. Basically, it'll help control the oil a lot better and keep the oil near the pickup. But as you can see, the pickup is right here in the middle. So there's no way that we'd be able to get a steering rack notch in the pan and still have this pan work. So if we push the engine forward, we could cut this back section out over here and kind of just eliminate the back of the oil pan that could work, but that means that we're pushing the engine forward even more, which means that it's gonna be up against basically the radiator. That's not gonna leave us any room for an intercooler, an oil cooler, or anything else like that. That also means that we're gonna push the engine far forward in front of the axle, which is really bad for weight balance in the car. So ideally, we push the engine back. And to make that happen, well, we're gonna have to push it back a lot. And there's a certain extent to how far back I can push it. One is clearance inside the truck for the passenger and myself, but also the length of the engine and the length of the transmission means that the shifter is going to be somewhere around here. And if you put the shifter too far back, then you're reaching behind you to do a shift. And that's not ideal. You want the shifter kind of, you know, in the right spot to be natural. You're going to be doing a lot of shifts. There's no reason to make it like undrivable. So how far can we push the engine back? That's what we're going to have to figure out. So I'm going to pull this oil pan off and get an idea of where the oil pump and pickup sit in here to see how much I'm actually able to notch out of the front of this pan. The more I can notch out of there, the better, which means I have a little bit more room to push the engine towards the steering rack, but also clear the steering rack. And I'm probably gonna have to cut a lot out of the firewall to make all this happen, which means it's a lot more work than I was expecting. I knew I was gonna have to cut the transmission tunnel out to fit the bigger transmission, but I was not expecting to have to cut the entire firewall out to be able to get the engine to fit. No, let me try the other gun. I got it. All right, so I'm gonna pop the oil pan off right now, and obviously it is filthy. If I was gonna use this engine, I would not be taking it off like this. I would clean the engine first, but all I'm gonna use is the head, and when I do take that off, I'm obviously gonna clean it, so I'm not too worried about this right now. Let's see if I can get it to pop off. This is a modified hammer. This is a racing hammer right here. That is a massive oil pump. It's huge. So there's not much room to notch. So I bought this engine off of Facebook Marketplace, and they're like, yeah, no, it's a good running engine. It just leaks some coolant. So I'm like, where does it leak coolant from? Is it like, did it overheat? Did it blow a head gasket? And they're like, no, head gasket's good. It runs good. It just is leaking coolant. So they brought it by the shop, and I noticed that there was JB Weld over here, and there was a cracked block. So at some point, somebody had slapped some JB Weld on it to try to get the coolant to stop leaking. But I don't know why the block is cracked, but it is. Now I pop the oil pan off, and looking in here, well, those are pieces of bearing. So that's an issue. If there's any of that bearing material that went through the oil system and went into the head, then the head is trash. The cams are trash. Basically, this entire thing is garbage. The oil pump right now is probably trash too, because if those pieces went through the pump, then it went into the gears and could destroy the gears. Maybe the screen in here is fine enough to block any particles from getting in there that are big enough to damage it, but I'm gonna have to pull the oil pump apart and inspect it and see if it's still good. It's 500 bucks. So not terrible. So they wanted 1100 or something, and then they brought it by and I was like, the block's cracked. I'll give you 500 bucks. And worst case is I have something to use as a mock-up engine, but still I'd rather have what I needed. So, yep. Well, now I'm gonna look and see if there are any other oil pumps that fit better. All right, well, I did some research on the internet and it looks like this oil pump is a K24 oil pump, but it also came on some K20s for some reason. There's so many different variants and I know so little about it. I don't know why they would put this on a K20, but it is what it is. Either way, this pump has to get changed and we got to put a standard K20 oil pump, which is much smaller, but overall the dimensions are going to be the same because the point right here is not going to change. This is the chain that drives the oil pump and that isn't moving. That is going to stay there no matter what pump we put on it. So that means I can't notch the front of the pan, which means that, well, the pan and everything, the entire engine have to go behind the steering rack. And let me show you what that means. So I've got the subframe pretty much where it should be. And I got the oil pan set in there as far forward as it can go. It's basically touching the steering rack at this point. And it is, well, it is really far back. I really like that for weight distribution, but it complicates everything else. It gives us a lot of room in the front, which is great. That means radiator, intercooler, oil cooler, all the things that we need to put up in this space will fit. But that means that the engine is going to fit somewhere around here into the firewall by almost a foot. That in itself isn't that big of a deal, but this truck is really narrow. That engine's not that wide, but the truck is really narrow. The engine itself right now, the block would fit in there if I cut all this firewall out. But the issue is the brake, the clutch, and the throttle pedal are possibly not gonna fit if I push the engine back this far because, well, let me come over here and show you. So if the engine is here, it does have some tilt to it, so that helps out a little bit. That means it comes up a little bit more on this side. Valve cover somewhere around here, but the real issue is gonna be the intake manifold is gonna sit somewhere around here, and I don't know how far back it's gonna go. So if the intake manifold is all the way over here, then that's where the brake pedal and the clutch pedal or the master cylinders were before, so pedals are around there somewhere. But if I cut all of this out and make this big box to fit everything, then I don't know if a throttle pedal will fit, and the brake pedal is going to be all the way far over against that tunnel. I've got a lot of thinking to do to see if this can all fit, and I can't really do anything until I get the intake manifold and see if that's even feasible. And if it isn't, then I got to figure out what to do with the oil pan, move the engine forward. I don't know yet, but that's where I am right now. And that's kind of, well, I'm stuck at this point. I don't have any other way to tell what the dimensions are in this space without getting the engine in there and putting an intake manifold on it, the proper intake manifold. This project is getting a lot more complicated than I thought it was going to be. I knew I was going to build a tube chassis for it, or somewhat of a tube chassis. I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but honestly, I thought the engine and the subframe were going to fit in a lot easier. So from what I thought was going to be 4 or 5 days, 6 days of work to get this all to fit is probably a couple weeks now. And you guys know the deadline. It's coming up. We're about 2 months away, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. And I don't even know if it's all going to work. Like, all this, spent close to $20,000 so far. Yeah, the truck was $6,000. I got about $12,000 or $13,000, maybe $15,000 worth of parts so far that I've ordered, because I had to order everything really fast to try to get it here as soon as possible. It might not work, but we're gonna keep trying. We're gonna get some more parts, and we're gonna see how we can make this work. So there's got to be some way that I can fit this in there. I just don't know how yet.